Okay, my name is Marissa Morgan, and my presentation is on grandparents raising grandchildren. This population is also called grandfamilies, and in Utah there are roughly 24,000 children being raised by their grandparents. The number one reason is drug abuse by the parent. Some other reasons could be from poverty, death of parents, incarceration, and mental illness, or combinations of all of those. The grandchildren may come into their grandparents' homes with many issues and hardships. Many children have been abused and or neglected in their homes from their parents. The children tend to thrive in these situations with their grandparents. They are taken out of bad situations and do much better. They have increased stability and more permanent home situations, and they tend to have better behavioral and mental health outcomes. Okay, with the media shows kind of minimal examples of grandparents actually raising their grandchildren. There are many examples of strong grandparent-grandchild relationships, but the parents are also involved. The news portrays this population as largely resulting from the opioid epidemic. This can be a large cause for this population, so it's a pretty accurate portrayal here. Many other news articles talked about the parents' drug or alcohol problems that led to them living with the grandparents. So with family support, lack of family support is the biggest thing leading to this population. There are many support groups available for the grandparents raising their grandchildren. The two biggest ones I found was the AARP and Grandfamilies.org. Other family members can be very helpful in easing the burden and hardships on the grandparents. Raising grandchildren can put a lot of stress on grandparents, which can cause severe health issues, especially if those are at an increased age. So other family members can really help ease the burden and stressors put on the grandparents. Role of the peers, like I said in the last slide, support groups are really important for this population. I found a couple more, the helpguide.org, USA.gov, the AARP Grandfamilies Guide, and Generations United. The NACAC also provides resources to help grandparents find support groups around them or online of people who are in similar situations. These programs and other close peers can help ease the stress and hardships placed on grandparents raising their grandchildren. Okay, cyclic nature. There isn't much of one with this population. I did find this quote and I found it to be kind of applicable. If you raise your kids, then you can spoil your grandchildren, but if you spoil your kids, then you have to raise your grandchildren. I thought that was kind of interesting here. So it can be a cyclic nature for this population in a small sense. It would probably skip generations. If the reasons that the parents are not involved is because of a drug or alcohol problem, these can be passed on to their children and put them in similar situations. I have seen this situation passed on in close family members of mine. My grandparents raised their granddaughter and then ended up raising her daughter, their great-grandchild, as well. So it can be a passed on behavior. Legal and political system. This population can face a lot of legal issues, especially when it comes to custody issues of their grandchildren, adoption or care and custody. The parents may not always be in good situations or relationships with their own parents, the grandparents. This could cause problems with custody of the grandchild and keeping them safe. Without custody, grandparents have issues signing consent forms, or permission slips, enrolling them in school, consents for physicals, etc. Families must go to court to obtain guardianship or to adopt the grandchild. In doing this, they must prove that the parent is unfit. So this could cause a lot of problems with the family dynamics and put a lot of stresses on the relationships in order to keep the grandchild safe. Some potential barriers with this population. There could be financial barriers if the grandparents don't have the means to support the grandchildren. Medical insurance, access to childcare or school for the grandchild, not being able to afford the childcare, no emotional support available. Like I said before, it can cause a lot of family dysfunctions or problems, barriers to enrolling the children in school, and grief and loss if the situation is because of the loss of the parents. Socioeconomic status and race or ethnicity. So grandfamilies are diverse and represent all varieties of income levels, race, and ethnicities. A low socioeconomic status could leave these grandfamilies at risk for not having supplies and means to survive or provide for the grandchildren. If grandparents do not have the income to support or provide for their grandchildren, they could have lower health outcomes and problems. Race and ethnicity is not a huge contributing factor for this population. It's very diverse, that can affect anybody. In terms of religion, religious groups can be very helpful and beneficial for these populations. Many religious groups provide emotional and even monetary support to individuals in need. Many faith-based organizations are available for resources and support in their communities. There wasn't a huge correlating factor with gender in this population, but gender could pose a small issue or barrier for them. Grandparents, especially grandfathers, could have a difficult time during the teenage years of their granddaughters, and same situation with grandmothers and their grandsons. It just could have some added stress on both parties. Geographical location. If the grandparents live in rural areas, it could be more difficult for them to find adequate schools and or childcare for their grandchildren. Those in more urban areas may have more access to resources and help than those in the rural areas. Telehealth and telemedicine could be very beneficial for this population, especially during times like these where we have this pandemic we are going on. Grandparents and those with an increased age are at a higher risk, so it would be important for them to really stay home at this time. And so if they themselves or their grandchild was sick, telehealth could really be beneficial at times like this. Telehealth could also be difficult for some grandparents to access if they aren't good with technology or don't have internet at their house. Some biases for this population. There could be some biases against this population in a sense that they are not the traditional family dynamic. So some people may hold that against them. There could also be biases held against them as to why the parents are not in the picture, whether it's from drugs or alcohol abuse situations or if they're incarcerated. There wasn't much of a correlation between grandfamilies and the international scopes or disparities here. And here are my references.